If you're feeling exhausted by the weight of the world this season and it's only February, then you're not alone. And I want you to stay tuned to learn more about how to go brave even when life throws you lemons and how to make lemonade, brave lemonade from that. So thank you for joining me yet again for our Cultivating Courage series. I say it's a series because every episode we're going to be talking about cultivating courage. And in this particular one, it's leading off of our discussion of Joshua 1 and how we are preparing and pursuing the promises of God in our lives and doing it by way of courage. We learned about Joshua being encouraged in God to take lead and take responsibility over the people of Israel, and how the people of Israel backed him up and encouraged him along the way to pursue or to go into the promised land for which God had intended for them to have. And though this is not a scripturally based episode, I'm going back to that because at the core of being strong and courageous, one thing with two components. And that one thing is your mindset. So we're going to talk about mindset and specifically being growth minded and optimistic. So before we jump into that, I just want to let you know that courage is a part of who we are. Whenever we're practicing resilience, whenever we are starting over, that takes a lot of courage. That takes a lot of intentionality, focus to re-engage or reconnect with maybe your employer or your family when things have been shaken and when things have gone out of sorts. As we've been experiencing in the world today between politics, the aftermath of the Super Bowl, as well as the tragedies that's been happening across the nation and personally within our families, losing loved ones and having experiences that have been shaking us to our core. Being brave is a part of the core of who we are. And so I want to talk about that by way of mindset, because I truly believe in order to do the things we desire to do and possess what we desire to have, and then be able to give from what we have, it requires for us to be. And by being, meaning believing and having the mindset to be able to cultivate the behaviors that we desire to execute and be disciplined in. Which is why cultivating courage initially starts with doing the soul work, that inner work, transitioning into developing emotional intelligence, where we get into courageous EQ. And then from there, we learn how to live, love, and lead bravely. And that's a whole nother episode for which I've talked about several of those components in our Cultivating Courage series, Unwrapping Courage, a gift for your soul this season back in December. And so if you want to learn more about what it means to cultivate courage, soul work, emotional intelligence, and the like, go ahead and go back to those videos. And I'll continue to talk about that throughout these series of videos that I'll be hosting for you all. And so getting back to the main thing, I have some notes here that I want to be intentional with going through, because I want to go into depth as to how these mindsets really help us to be courageous in times where courage doesn't seem like it's easily accessible, but it's inside of us. It's the depth of resilience that we can keep going and to bounce back from what life has thrown at us. So the first thing we need to embrace is growth mindedness. And that means we commit to learning, we adapt, and we seek to improve rather than prove. And so there are certain things that will make us feel uncertain in this space, but with a growth mindset, that courage to navigate a new mindset, a new perspective, a new frame of mind and focus, that's going to help us to navigate through the uncertainty that we may feel. And so there are 5 things that I want you to keep in mind when you're thinking about growth mindedness. 1, to be continuously learning. I want you to challenge yourself to face the obstacles that may be in our way as opportunities for growth. So, one question I want you to consider when you think about challenges and how you can turn those obstacles into opportunities, what is it that we can learn in this very moment? So I want you to think about that as you think about some things that may be tugging and stretching and causing some discomfort. What can you do, or what can you take from this moment? What lessons can be learned? Number two, seeing obstacles as opportunities. Instead of resisting difficulties, let's ask, how can this make me stronger? How can this make me better? How can this pull out the best version of myself? Number three, prioritize progress over perfection. As someone, and I don't even like to use these terms anymore, but for the sake of this conversation here, a recovering perfectionist, as someone who really put perfection on a pedestal, we have to see our progress as an opportunity for growth, because perfection is not achievable, especially on this side of heaven. And we have to do our due diligence to see and value progress and the milestones and the steps we can take to be better. Because again, if the goal is to improve and not prove, perfection, we're trying to prove ourselves. But if we know who we are and the value that we bring and the worth that we bring to whatever community, our family, our employer, perfection is not going to really benefit us as much as we think that it does. And so, in thinking about that, life isn't about getting all things right. It's about moving forward and taking one step at a time. How do we eat an elephant? One bite at a time. Now, granted, I'm not saying that we're eating elephants out here, but one bite at a time. If we see something big, why are we trying to reach that perfect end game when in actuality we can only see what's right in front of us? And sometimes because of avoidance, sometimes because of fear, sometimes again because of a lack of courage, we don't see what's right in front of us. So if we take a step back to look at what's in front of us, then we could progressively move forward. Number four, staying agile in our planning. As we have found evidence in what has happened already in the first 2 months of this year, we can plan as much as we want, but there's a saying that God laughs at our plans. Now, I'm not saying don't plan at all, because God wants us to plan to give him something to work with. But in that, we have to be agile. We have to be flexible. We have to be willing to maneuver a little bit differently as we are considering our plans, because the unexpected, it will happen, and our ability to pivot and adjust is a sign of strength, not failure. Again, our ability to pivot and adjust is a sign of strength, not failure. Number five, be open to feedback. The right kind of feedback actually makes us better. Now, I caution you to say, you want to get feedback from people or a person who genuinely is concerned or genuinely desires to see you grow and become better. Now, we have these folks that could be in our life that want to see us fail and have constantly negative conversations with us about what they can and can't do, or what they don't see you doing in life. And that type of feedback is not helpful to us. Now, granted, I believe in constructive criticism, especially from people or those in our lives who are ahead of us and who have a level of expertise and knowledge in certain areas where we are learning and growing. I understand that, and getting constructive criticism when we're looking to improve ourselves. That's what therapy is, counseling is. That's what doing reflection and that self-work and that inventory is about, so that we can be a little bit more constructive with how we are making progress and moving forward. But don't just take advice and suggestions from anyone, because again, typically it's based on their opinion, based on their perception. I'm not saying don't seek help or support outside of yourself. I am saying that seek support and help outside of yourself, but make sure that you are discerning and ask the Lord to increase your discernment, because being willing to learn and unlearn and relearn is a part of that feedback loop, that feedback process. Growth mindedness helps us to keep moving forward, even when we don't feel like it. And I know even beyond this season that we're in the world, there are just some times where we just don't feel like it. We have a lot on our plate. We're feeling overwhelmed. We're feeling burnt out. We're trying to manage multiple priorities. We're trying to be our best selves in relationships. And sometimes we just don't feel like doing anything, let alone having a growth mindset. But that's going to help us to persevere and to push forward when we don't feel like it, when our emotions try to weigh heavy on us and be the controller of the situation. But with a growth mindset, thinking about what we're thinking about, that's going to keep us from being stuck in our feelings. But again, there's another ingredient here that I want us to consider along this journey of being brave when we don't feel like it. And that next component is optimism. And I'm not saying optimism in a way that we just totally disregard our reality. No, I want us to be realistic in this process, but it's about choosing hope, having a hopeful outlook. And here is what optimism looks like in action, and that is anticipation. We don't have to figure out every single outcome because in actuality, we can't unless we've built systems or unless we've built strategies to be able to establish a particular outcome. So for example, if I know that I want to get emails out on a weekly basis that I send to my subscriber list, then I can determine the outcome of how successful I am in making that happen. Am I being proactive in writing it beforehand? If I know I have to travel, if I know I have a big week on my job, I can determine the outcome of that if I'm successful in fulfilling that goal or that task. And that comes by way of systems, preparing beforehand and being very intentional. But when we think about it, I want us to instead to let us stay open to possibility. And this anticipation is just having us go with the ebbs and flows of life. Not saying that we don't make life happen for ourselves, but being very cautious and being very aware of our position and stance that could cause resistance in our lives. The second thing when we're talking about optimism is gratitude. When we appreciate what we do have, we create space for more good things to come. Gratitude is one of the elements that I talk about, or one of the strategies I talk about when I reference disrupting self-sabotage, because I use the word disruption very strategically because I believe, just like imposter syndrome, is that whenever we level up, whenever we elevate, those things are going to try to come back in our lives and try to rear its ugly head and get us doubting ourselves and speaking negative over ourselves instead of pushing past them. So we need strategies to be able to disrupt when those things try to come into our lives. So one of those strategies in disrupting self-sabotage is optimism, and specifically looking at gratitude, looking at joy in a particular situation or circumstance, because those aspects, specifically gratitude and joy, are something that we can choose to involve in our day-to-day life. It's not just something that happens. Happiness happens. It just happens. But joy and gratitude, we have to choose that, because when we're able to choose that, we have more control over what that experience is like. For example, if I'm frustrated with a colleague, what can I do to help get over the frustration? Well, I can think about what they do very well on the job versus thinking about how they don't show up or how they're not doing this or they're not fulfilling that task. No, let me think about what is good, what is honorable, what is lovely about this person. I'm thinking about Philippians 4:8 as I'm saying that, things that are lovely, that are true, and so on. Like, what are the good things about this individual, and express gratitude over that. And even extending that to start to express that to the person, like, oh, I appreciate how well you execute on this project or on this task. And that's going to get our minds, again, growth mindedness, in a way that's going to help us to push past the feeling that we may have. And then the last thing when I consider optimism is focusing on what we can control. There is so much going on in the world that we cannot change. We just simply cannot change. But the things that we can change, our thoughts, our feelings, our behaviors, and our actions. And that That right there is powerful. That right there is a superpower, our ability to focus on what we can control. And with that, we can kind of set an expectation of the outcomes. I talked about anticipation and not worrying about the outcome. But when we're focused on what we can control, there are certain instances where we can have great expectation about a positive outcome and a positive desire. When I think about optimism, it isn't about toxic positivity. It's about reminding ourselves that there is hope. There is hope, meaning that there's healing. There is the optimism. There is a purpose, and there are people that we can empower and people that we can encourage to embrace gratitude. And even in hard times, we can have a level of hope. We can have a level of optimism. And when we expect the best, we create opportunities for the best to happen. So again, I hope that this has been a blessing to you. I hope this is not too long. I am in a different environment, as you can tell, based on my background. And so I'm trying to maneuver a little bit differently. But my hope is that this was helpful to you and will help you to expand your growth mindedness, as well as to consider your optimism and looking at where you're at and some of the questions that you can ask yourself. And I would love for you to take some time to go ahead and like, comment, subscribe, and share this with someone you know. If you are not subscribed to our YouTube channel, I encourage you to do so. And then also, I would encourage you to subscribe to our weekly correspondence via email, where I introduce this video and share other topics about how to go brave in your life, in your relationships, as you lead in your businesses and or your organizations, because I truly believe when we go in courage, we are more likely to see the success and see the benefits of our courage. Though sometimes it requires us to take risks in those spaces, we are better for it. And until next time, let your soul work be your best work to a better you. Have a great one.